The South China Sea. 400 hours. The air is thick with the smell of salt and jet fuel aboard the Shandong, the pride and joy of the People's Liberation Army Navy. To the radar operators in the Combat Information Center, everything looks normal. The screen is a clean sweep of green until it isn't. Suddenly, a notification pings. It is not a missile. It is not a jet. It is a thermal bloom detected 3 meters below the waterline, moving at a speed that should not be possible for something submerged. Before the alarm can even reach the bridge, a muffled roar kicks the carrier 5 degrees to the port side. The unsinkable fortress just met Japan's newest nightmare. For decades, China has played the Great Wall of Sand game, building carriers and claiming islands like they are playing a high-stakes game of Monopoly. But Japan just flipped the board. While the world was looking at flashy stealth jets, Tokyo was perfecting a weapon that does not just challenge the Chinese Navy. It makes the very concept of a carrier strike group look like an expensive floating target. China's Navy is terrified, and today, we are going to look at the carrier killer that has turned the East China Sea into a giant no-go zone. To understand why Beijing is sweating, we have to talk about the hypervelocity gliding project. For years, Japan followed a defense-only doctrine, which basically meant they had a world-class military that was not allowed to punch back. That era is officially over. In the year 2026, the Japanese self-defense forces have been unshackled. Japan has revealed its latest iteration of the hypervelocity glider, and it is a masterpiece of tactical denial. Most missiles fly in a predictable arc, like a quarterback throwing a football. If you know the arc, you can intercept it with standard air defense. But the Japanese glider? It is more like a football that decides to turn into a bird halfway through the flight. It launches on a rocket booster, reaches the edge of space, and then detaches a glide vehicle that skips along the atmosphere like a stone on a pond. By the time it is screaming toward a Chinese carrier, it is traveling at speeds exceeding Mach 5. Let us do the math. At Mach 5, a missile covers about 1.7 kilometers per second. By the time a Chinese Type 055 destroyer's radar realizes the glider is in the neighborhood, the crew has just enough time to realize they should have stayed in port. China's current military hardware is great for drones and old jets, but trying to hit this Japanese projectile is like trying to swat a supersonic fly with a toothpick. Why is this superior to China's own Dongfeng 21 Delta, the so-called carrier killer? It comes down to precision and pacing. China's missiles are big, clunky, and depend on a massive satellite network that the United States Navy could jam in its sleep. Japan's new weapon uses a multi-mode seeker. It does not just guess where the carrier is. It uses an imaging infrared seeker that recognizes the specific thermal signature of the Shandong's engines. The heat generated by friction at Mach 5 is enough to melt most metals. The air becomes a plasma sheath around the missile. Japan, being the masters of materials science, developed a specific ceramic composite skin that keeps the internals cool, while the outside glows like a miniature sun. China spent billions of dollars building carriers to project power. Japan spent a fraction of that on a ceramic lawn dart that turns those carriers into very large, very expensive artificial reefs. But wait, there is more. Japan is not just attacking from the sky. They have opened a second front where China is even more vulnerable, beneath the waves. If the hypersonic glider is the hammer, the OZZ-5 autonomous underwater vehicle is the scalpel. Japan's Mitsubishi Heavy Industries just perfected a subsurface drone that is virtually invisible. Carriers are surrounded by destroyers specifically designed to listen for submarines. They listen for the chugging of diesel engines and the rhythmic whirring of metal propellers. The OZZ-5 does not whir. It uses a low-frequency synthetic aperture sonar and an electric propulsion system that makes less noise than a dolphin with a cold. It can sit on the seabed for weeks at a time, perfectly still, waiting for the specific acoustic signature of a Chinese task force. When the target arrives, the OZZ-5 does not fire a loud conventional torpedo. It releases a swarm of micromines that attach to the hull of the ship using magnetic sensors. It is the military equivalent of getting a virus on your computer and not realizing it until your hard drive melts. By the time China's Navy realizes they have been compromised, the OZZ-5 has already slipped away, back into the deep, dark silence of the Pacific. Let us talk about the cost per kill ratio, because this is where the deep dive gets real. This is the part that keeps the generals in Beijing awake at night. A Chinese Fujian-class carrier costs roughly $9 billion to build. That is not counting the 50 jets on deck, which cost another $3.5 billion, or the 5,000 sailors on board. Total value? Let us call it $13 billion for a single floating city. A single Japanese hypersonic missile costs approximately $5 million to $10 million. To guarantee a kill, Japan can fire 20 of them at once. That is a $200 million investment to erase a $13 billion asset. In business terms, that is a massive return on investment. China's economy is currently struggling with a massive real estate crisis and a shrinking population. They cannot afford to replace carriers as fast as Japan can build ceramic lawn darts. Japan is essentially telling China, go ahead, build more carriers. We will just build more missiles. We can do this all day, and your wallet will give up long before our factory lines do. It is not about who has the biggest ship. It is about who can afford to lose their weapons. Japan is winning the math war. There is another layer to this terror. It is called the Maven Smart System. This is an artificial intelligence-driven data fusion program used by the United States and shared with Japan. It has already been used to identify over 13,000 targets in recent conflicts, and now it is being pointed at the South China Sea. Maven takes every satellite photo, every radio intercept, and every sonar ping and turns them into a real-time map of Chinese movements. China used to rely on the vastness of the ocean to hide their ships. Now, thanks to artificial intelligence, the ocean is transparent. If a Chinese submarine leaves port in Hainan, the Maven system alerts the Japanese OZZ-5 drones before the submarine even reaches deep water. China is finding out that in the year 2026, there is no such thing as a secret maneuver. They are being watched by an eye in the sky that never blinks and hunted by a ghost in the water that never sleeps. President Zelensky in Ukraine recently announced a sweeping reform of his own armed forces to handle drone warfare. And Japan is taking notes. They are shifting their entire budget away from traditional tanks and toward these autonomous systems. The Japanese self-defense force is no longer a junior partner. They are becoming the primary gatekeepers of the Pacific. China challenged a Japanese fighter jet recently, and it was a big mistake because it revealed just how advanced Japan's sensor fusion has become. Japan is now paying its technical officers higher salaries to ensure their drone operators are the best in the world. They are treating cyber warfare and drone piloting with the same prestige as fighter pilots. This cultural shift means that the next time China tries to bully a Japanese vessel, they will not be facing a polite patrol boat. They will be facing a coordinated swarm of high-tech predators. This is the big picture moment. For the last 80 years, the aircraft carrier was the king of the ocean. If you had a carrier, you owned the sea. But Japan's revelation of the hypersonic glider and the OZZ-5 marks the beginning of the end for the big ship era in the East China Sea. Beijing is terrified because their entire global strategy depends on protecting sea lanes. If they cannot protect their carriers from a neighbor that is technically a self-defense force, how can they hope to challenge the global reach of the United States Navy? The irony is thick enough to choke on. Japan, the nation that pioneered carrier warfare at Pearl Harbor over 80 years ago, is now the nation that has perfected the weapon that makes carriers obsolete. They created the king, and now they have created the king killer. China is not just facing Japan. They are facing a unified front. The United States just secured a billion-dollar contract to send high-mobility artillery rocket systems to allies in the region. Canada is increasing its spending. Even the Philippines are joining massive naval exercises. But Japan is the anchor. With their new hypersonic tech, they provide a protective umbrella that covers the entire region. China's Navy used to think they could win a war of exhaustion. They thought they could simply outbuild everyone. But you cannot outbuild a missile that costs 1/1000th of the price of the ship it destroyed. The People's Liberation Army Navy is currently scrambling to upgrade their sensors, but you cannot fix a fundamental physics problem with a simple software patch. You cannot stop a Mach 5 glide vehicle that is skipping through the air like a ghost, and you cannot hit an underwater drone that you cannot hear. Japan has rewritten the rules of engagement. They have moved from a shield to a very, very sharp spear. As the United States Navy moves more assets into the region to pair with Japan's new carrier killers, the balance of power has not just shifted, it has been completely reset. The rising sun is not just a flag anymore. It is the last thing a Chinese carrier captain might see before his $13 billion ship meets the bottom of the ocean. The era of Chinese naval dominance ended before it even truly began. If you want to see more deep dives into how technology is ending the era of the superpower, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We are tracking the secret aerial ambush developments next week, and you will not want to miss how the United States is integrating these Japanese weapons into their own global fleet. In modern war, it is not the biggest ship that wins. It is the one you never saw coming. It is the silent drone. It is the ceramic missile. It is the math of attrition that finally brings a giant to its knee. Japan has the math, they have the tech, and they have the will. China is right to be terrified. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next deep dive.